Greetings, church. It's good to be with you again for our daily encouragement. Here for the next 2 days, we'll be in Genesis chapter 15, verse 1, looking at Abram and God's interaction together. And to give you just a little bit of a context on this, we are introduced to Abram just a few chapters before in Genesis chapter 12. And we don't know a whole lot about Abram at this point in the story, although we're getting to know him. But one of the things that we know about Abram was that he and his family were on a journey that they had been sent on by God. Much like the Blues Brothers, they were on a mission from Gad. I'm sorry, that was a terrible impersonation, and I won't do it again. But they were. God had sent them on a journey. In fact, God had gone to Abram and called him to leave his country and everything that he had ever known in order to venture into a land that God would show him. And so Abram had to leave his place of comfort. He had to leave his home and probably some of his extended family in order to follow God and wherever it was that God was showing him. And so Abram went on this journey of uncertainty, not knowing once he had ventured beyond his land what lay ahead for him, what challenges were there before him. And yet Abram goes. But we also know that Abram, when he went, and though he went, Abram was afraid and anxious about the journey and some of the challenges that he met along the way. We know in Genesis chapter 13, when Abram and his family come up to Egypt, as they begin to journey through, Abram is fearful that the Egyptians are going to capture him and kill him. In Genesis 14, Abram goes to his nephew Lot to rescue him before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they barely escape with their lives. And so there's fear in Abram's heart. He's concerned about the journey and what was ahead for him. And in Genesis chapter 15, when God shows up in Abram's life again, he has a message for him. And here's what he says in Genesis 15, verse 1. The word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, and here's what God says. Do not be afraid, Abram. And the first thing that God says to Abram is, do not be afraid. Now, God speaks directly into Abram's fear. God sees his heart, and the first thing he does is address the condition of his heart. And he says, you don't have to be afraid. As I think about what we're going through, I imagine for many of us, we share some of that fear, not knowing what today or the days ahead are going to look like. But one of the great privileges that we have as God's children is to come before him and to allow God to speak into the condition of our heart, to allow God to speak directly into our fear with using our name, not that of Abram or another or even mine, but allowing God to speak to your fear. And have you given God the chance to do that yet? Have you paused Netflix long enough to allow him to, in the midst of prayer, to allow him to speak to that? Have you pushed aside maybe the madness of trying to figure out what your work looks like right now? Have you just allowed God to come and speak directly to you, whispering to you, you don't have to be afraid, for I am with you? Church, I pray that that's what we allow God to do in our heart and our life, so that we can walk away with the assurance that was Abram's. Thank you, church. May you be blessed this day.